Hi everyone, it's Katie, and today I wanted to do a video response to Kelly Bear, who recently asked us, what decks can't you live without? So she asked us to name 5 decks, and originally the question was, if you could only have 5 decks for the rest of your life, which would they be? But then she kind of amended it to be more, if you were going away for a year, which 5 decks would you take with you? So I know my top 3. Without a doubt, I have a top 3. So mine actually are pretty much in order. My absolute number 1 deck that if I could only ever have one deck, which would make me very sad, but it would be the Smith-Waite Centennial edition. I just think the Rider-Waite is, it's a classic, and I never get tired of it. I really don't. It's always a wonderful deck to read with. And if you're reading for other people, there is something nice about, them seeing the more traditional imagery, the imagery that they expect you to be using. I just think, for me, I just can't go wrong with this deck. I really do love the imagery, especially in the Centennial edition. And it is a deck, when I go on holidays and I can only take one deck, I take this deck. I just think it's an absolute staple for me, and I really would not want to ever be without this deck. The next 2 are pretty much ties for me, and they are what I would consider, my soul decks, my decks, the decks that I feel were made for me, that I feel like I come home to when I use. The first is the Gill Tarot, and I've spoken about this a little bit before. I love this baby. I really do. I went a little while without using it recently because I was trying to use all of the new decks that I have, and I was kind of just feeling overwhelmed, so I decided I just needed to use my Gill Tarot. And the very first spread I did was not a particularly personal, deep, emotional spread, but I burst into tears just because it felt like coming home. It was so easy to work with. It was just... Both this and the third deck that I'm going to show you are very clear and honest, but they're kind and loving. They're nurturing. That's not to say that they aren't brutal when they need to be, but they do it in a compassionate way. So these decks, the Gill Tarot, I love the imagery, and reading with it is just, it's effortless and it's a joy. And it just genuinely makes me happy. So my third deck would definitely be the Liminal. Now I know that this is a fairly new deck for me, but I just, much like the Gill Tarot, I just feel like it's my wavelength, it gets me and I get it immediately. I absolutely adore the imagery. I think it's one of the most beautiful decks I've ever seen. And I'd wanted it for the longest time, but due to the price, I really had to save up for it. And I know that, when I showed this recently, a lot of the comments that I got were, you spent that much money on a deck, it's very expensive. And yes, I did. I felt called to this deck, I really did, and I don't regret a cent. In fact, it's gotten to the point where this is the first deck that's ever made me feel a need for a backup copy. And I don't know if I'll be able to save up in time before it goes out of print, but that's how much I love this deck. And like the Gill Tarot, it's kind and it's loving, but it's clear and it's honest. They're traditional enough for me to enjoy working with them as a Rider-Waite deck, but they definitely have their own voice and their own message. Now, if this were going to be the top 5 decks for the rest of my life, the next 2 would be a Marseille and a Thoth. Simply because tarot is a tool that not only do I like working with for healing and guidance, but I also find endlessly interesting. And if I could only use 5 decks for the next, I don't know how long, 50, 60 years, I do feel like at some point I'm really going to want to dive deep into the Marseille and the Thoth. I do have a Marseille copy that I would pick, that specific deck, because I really like the colours. And then I would just have the Thoth deck. But as Kelly kind of amended this to be the 5 decks that you would choose to have if you were going on a trip or going away for a year or a few years, these are the decks that at the moment that I own, I love. and that really bring me excitement and that I use a lot and that I want to work with. I was actually unsure about picking the Fountain Tarot, just because I feel like it is so neutral and I almost feel like I'm doubling up with the Rider-Waite. But there is something a little bit different about the Fountain Tarot. I go to the Fountain Tarot all the time, especially for readings for others, especially for readings around things that need a more objective, clear perspective. It's just a really beautiful deck, and it's a wonderful deck to read with. So at this moment, I wouldn't want to be without it, because it is a deck that I reach for consistently, and it's a deck that I do enjoy working with, and it is beautiful. I really think all the praise this deck has got over the past year or so is really well deserved. The art is absolutely stunning, and the imagery itself isn't all that traditional, and yet it really finds the core, the absolute core of the card, and manages to depict that in a really, really beautiful way. So I certainly, at this point in my life, at this point in my tarot journey, would really not want to be without the Fountain Tarot, because as I said, it is one that I reach for, and it's one when a topic calls for an objective third party kind of perspective, I don't think you can do much better than the Fountain Tarot. Now, there were many decks vying for the 5th position on this list, but I had to keep coming back to that question of, if I was going away for a year or two and I could only work with 5 decks for that period, which ones would I want to work with? And if I had to make that decision today, I would take the Tarot of the Sephiroth. Now, I am not reading with this deck at this stage, but Kabbalah and the more esoteric associations and correspondences of tarot is something that I'm really interested in, and this deck is certainly one that kind of looks into all of that, involves all of that. And I do actually quite like the imagery, especially of the mages, not so much the minors. They're not quite as intricate and pretty as the mages, but I still really love this deck. It comes with quite a nice guidebook, but I think the reason I would pick this deck is because for that academic study side of me, I think I would really be, this deck would occupy me in a way that would be fulfilling for the next period of time. So I'm going to leave this there. These are the 5 tarot decks that if I could only work with 5 for the next year or 2 or foreseeable future, these were the ones in my collection that I would choose right now. So thanks so much, Kelly Bear, for encouraging us to have a bit of a think about our own collections and which decks we really go to, or the ones that we really feel pulled to. It was a bit of a difficult choice for me, not for my top 3, as I've said, but to kind of fill in those last 2 spots. I really had to think about what it is that I reach for, and also what it is that I like about tarot, what it is that I like to use tarot for. I know a couple of other people are doing video responses, so if you are or have, please leave the link below so I can check it out, and I will talk to you all again very soon. Much love, guys. Bye.